the money shot, as it were, the big payoff. In this section, I'm going to try and give you as much information and help as I possibly can for you to help yourselves, but also if you are working with people as a counselor, a therapist, or a coach, then some of this hopefully will be of use as well, as I know some of you are coaches and therapists. Emotional processing. This could have been called emotional literacy as well. The key issue that I've identified that seems to be preventing people from healing from CPTSD is a kind of emotional illiteracy, where they are simply unable to feel their own feelings or indeed to process them. What I want you to develop very early on is the idea that you do have some agency, you do have some sovereignty, you do have some control over yourself. If you have no idea of doing this, and you've never done any work like this, and you can barely get a foothold in it, use your imagination. I want you to imagine that you are in a control room that controls how you feel and how you are thinking. This is the beginnings of state management. This is the beginnings of self-governance. You do have more power to control how you feel than you imagine currently. People who struggle to get traction in life and struggle to get traction on the CPTSD issue, it's often because they just feel completely out of control. So I'm going to teach you ways to get more in control. One of the big resistances that I notice that people have to this is that, A, they're not particularly familiar with the concept, but it's outside of the comfort zone and it's do it yourself. You will not recover from CPTSD in a passive state of mind. You will not. You cannot. There is no therapist that can get inside your head and tell you what you're thinking. Only you know what you're truly thinking and feeling. So ultimately, it's going to be you that heals yourself. The best case scenario I described with a counselor or therapist, they are enabling you in that process. They're guiding you, they're supporting you, but it will be you that does this one way or another. It's going to be you. And some people don't like that idea. They would rather that somebody just came along and waved a magic wand and made everything okay, but that isn't going to happen. It can't happen, unfortunately. You can't be passive for the process simply because part of the process requires that you become active in the way in which you engage with reality. So being passive is the opposite. So you now need to start becoming active. Journaling. Absolutely. Journaling is a absolutely standard tool used in counseling and in psychotherapy generally. I'm going to teach you a way of doing of journaling that is quite specific. If you follow the instructions, it will work. If you deviate from the instructions, it's going to have different results. So if I tell you to do a thing or to not do a thing, please do or do not do that. Otherwise, you're going to get some really, really odd results. In the same way that if counseling is done in a slack way, in a slapdash way, it can actually re-traumatize the client. So journaling and the techniques I'm going to show you, if it's done sloppily or you start adding some crazy shit to it, it's going to have unwanted effects. I want you to get used to the idea of at least writing something every couple of days. This is something they tell aspiring writers to do. Writers write. You need to get used to doing this. It needs to be a new thing that you're going to get into. The reason for that is you have to make that which is currently internal external. When you do this kind of journaling, you will read what you have written, and maybe 5 days, a week, or a month later, you'll read it and you'll go, I can't believe I actually thought that. I can't believe I actually felt that way. The good element, it can be really frightening. Genuinely, at one time I thought somebody had hacked into my laptop. I was completely paranoid. I was like, there's no way I could have thought that that was true a month ago. The CIA is surely behind all of this. But no, it's something that I wrote when I was maybe in an emotional flashback, or I had a particular thing that was in my head that a month later I just couldn't even believe I'd ever entertained the idea. That's important so you can see just how powerful the emotional flashbacks are in influencing your cognitive processing. If you're not aware of how powerful your emotional flashbacks are, you won't be aware of how bad your cognitive distortions are. most of us who struggle to recover from CPTSD don't realize how far off the farm we've gone. You're like, yeah, I'm basically okay, but you know, and you're just way, way out there. Part of that is the isolation. You know, as we self-isolate, you get a bit strange. In the martial arts world, I used to be very, very into ninjutsu. It was a very, very spiritual martial arts style, as taught by Masaki Hatsumi. And one of the things that they encouraged was people to go into nature and just be isolated in nature. And they would say, the old Japanese scrolls say, don't do it for too long though, you'll be a weirdo. It says it, you will become strange. Even unto yourself you will become strange. Because you're only getting feedback internally. And so if that feedback is a little bit off, and it's not quite right, and that's the only feedback you're getting every day, you get weird ideas that run in your head. Very strange ideas start to develop, and they're not being challenged. This is why one of the themes that I'm going to be, you know, banging the drum of in 2017 is going to be try and find a good coach, try and find a good counselor and connect on this level, talk to each other, let's create these groups and connect. It's the human connectivity is going to allow us to heal a lot more of these issues than we currently realize. And the isolation and the loneliness is far more corrosive than we currently realize. We live in a culture right now where we think it's okay to just spend loads of time on your own. Loads of time in your own little world. Your Facebook algorithmed reality tunnel where you're only receiving news and ideas and videos about things that you want to hear about and no external feedback. That's weird. We ain't never lived like that in human evolution. You would live with a group of people who would know you by name, and when you saw them they would recognize you, and then there would be external people who would come in that you would interact with. That's how we evolved. That's what we're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be stuck with like having face-to-face contact regularly with just 3 people. And that's how most people live. They have face-to-face conversations with about 3 people. Everybody else is social media or through some other medium. It's not healthy, and it can lead to depression, anxiety, and drug addiction. It can certainly make drug addiction a lot worse. Yes, this is the Spartan element. Making friends with pain as a concept. I can't help you if you're not active in your own process. I can't. And I can't help you if you're discomfort phobic. I can't help you if you're not prepared to lean into the discomfort and pain sometimes. It can't be done. There isn't a pain-free way of doing this process, unfortunately. And it's good for you. Learn that pain is okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable sometimes. It's sick to think that you should always be in a state of pleasure. That's not normal. Comfort, too much comfort, isn't it horrible? Don't you get all weird and clammy and all your chi gets stuck everywhere? Blech. Go outside for a nice vigorous walk and get cold, and then come back and you really enjoy your cup of tea. Get the chi flowing. Make friends with the notion of emotional pain as being something that is necessary to progress. I did not say more pain is better. That's not true. We don't make the therapeutic process painful for the sake of it because we're not masochists. That is some weird puritanical thing that some people are into. It's not necessary. The therapeutic process, for me, when I do coaching with people, it's 50-50. 50% of the section is going to suck, and some of you have done coaching with me, so you know, and the rest of the time you will laugh. I will make you laugh. I will not let you laugh. It's not allowed. But some of the time it's painful and it's difficult. But when I say it's painful, you're not crying hysterically the whole time going, oh my God, it was all dreadful. That only happens once, twice. It's not necessary to get stuck in that too much. Okay, sadness. If you flee from sadness all the time, you're going to stay sick. So there's some rules here. If you stay self-isolated, you're going to stay sick. If you're only getting feedback from yourself, you're going to stay sick. If you're a sadness phobe, you're going to stay sick. Sadness is not a bad thing. Sadness is a good thing. Sadness is a beautiful emotion. I recommend, the Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran brought it up a number of times, but the best one is his poem on joy and sorrow, in which he explains that, the extent to which you can feel pain is the extent to which you can feel joy. This is the way the world used to think. It's some corrupted, perverted, Western decadent ideology that we have nowadays, that you should not experience pain, that it is bad to experience sadness. It's not bad to experience sadness. It's not bad to experience grief. It's good. It's good to experience grief. You will grieve in this life because sucky things are going to happen.
Is that because we went through world wars?
It's because the natural state of humanity is trauma, where these little weird balding creatures stuck on a rock spinning through space with many, many things that want us to die horribly. The chance of anybody going through life not experiencing pain, well, there is no chance of that. I mean, that was the formation of a whole religion, wasn't it? Buddhism was formed on the idea of how do we block out pain? Well, you can't. Okay, so how do we deal with the discomfort? The wars, the genocide, the racism, and all of that is probably, I would pontificate, neurosis that has grown out of the avoidance of authentic suffering. I was saying to somebody in one of the breaks, Carl Jung said, all neurosis is the avoidance of authentic suffering. If we can actually process grief and process sadness, we won't engage in neurosis. But you have to be neurotic to... If you look at the decisions that led up to the last 2 world wars and that will lead up to the next one, they're rooted in narcissism, they're rooted in psychopathy, they're rooted in neurosis and extremely distorted views of reality. As the individual loses contact with the outside world and only talks to himself or herself becomes weird, so the country that is no longer talking to the outside world and only talking to themselves becomes odd. Whole reality becomes skewed, and that can be a very dangerous situation. And at that point, the personal becomes political. You need to focus on creating a stronger relationship with yourself. The journaling process is not about finding new and interesting ways to torture yourself with dreadful things that happened in the past. It's about you being a good friend to yourself. A good friend listens without judgment. A good friend lets you speak when it's your time to speak. A good friend will say to you, how does that make you feel? I know I joke about this on YouTube videos. How does that make you feel? But authentically, that can really help. If somebody is just asking you, how does that make you feel? When that happened to you, how did you feel about that? Instead of me imposing my story, oh, that happened to you, check out what happened to me, blah, 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 blah. How did it make you feel? How is that part of your reality? How is that forming how you relate to the world and how you experience love and connection? I want you specifically to have an attitude of curiosity if you choose to engage on this particular path, to explore and expand your emotions specifically, not your thoughts. There are times where it is of great therapeutic value to philosophize. When you're doing coaching with me, sometimes I will say to you, let's be philosophers. What do you think about this? What is the moral boundary that should be set upon how a parent treats their child, etc.? Do not let that be an escape. Do not disassociate through intellectualizing. This is about emotion. Emotions are described through adjectives that describe feeling. So if I say to you, how does that make you feel? And you say, I think people shouldn't do that, that's not right. I want to hear how you feel. It makes me feel angry. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel disappointed. And then you explore and expand. I will show you how to do that in a moment. Don't worry. I'll fill in the gaps here. If you're regularly asking yourself, how does this situation make me feel? It could be regarded as narcissistic navel-gazing. But if it is done in a boundaried and specific way to suit the agenda of exploring your emotions and acknowledging your needs, it is healthy. This will cause you to have a stronger, more developed sense of self. For those of you who have not been permitted a sense of self, regularly asking, how did that situation at work today make me feel? Because right now you're going, oh, don't think about that. You don't need that. You don't need to. You could be strong. Just be tough. The tough girls and tough guys of CPTSD, we can take it. Pile another burden on. I don't care. I'm not really here anyway. That's not a life. That's not the way to live. So regularly asking yourself, how does this situation make me feel? You get an answer. You say, it makes me feel excited. What's that excitement made up of? I feel hopeful. I feel optimistic, but I'm also scared. You start to explore how you feel. You're there. You're present. There is a human being there with wants and needs and drives who is actually present. I will permit one rapid-fire question from you, sir, but only from you. You're the golden child. Because you passed that back. Thank you very much. And everybody else will be ignored. All my attention.
Thanks. That's just a joke, yeah. Just wanted to quickly ask you about I'm going back to the whole fundamental basis of this. Understand from Layla's introduction about it's all based on limbic system loops and circuits going round and round. I'm just thinking that on this point, and I know it's a subtle point as well, that if you keep concentrating on the issue or the problem, do you think there's a danger of sort of reinforcing this loop?
Yeah. So don't focus on the problem, focus on the emotion. If you're taking notes, that's worth writing down. Don't focus on the problem, focus on the emotion. Your dumb brain is going to say, no, 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 focus on the problem, because the solution is in the environment. The danger is in the environment. The threat or the gain, the reward is in the environment, but the brain is wrong. We are fighting evolution here. Focus on the emotion. If you process the emotion, there will be no loop. The loops come from never processing the emotion, but looking at the problem the whole time. So if you're going, I want to be back with my narcissistic ex-boyfriend, narcissistic ex-girlfriend, or whatever, you're not actually processing the fact that you feel hugely sad that somebody would use love against you like that. That you feel hugely sad that you were only open to that relationship because you were not parented properly. In that sense, you didn't have a mother, you didn't have a father, you had somebody who was there present, physically at least, but not emotionally. So it's actually this, it's a huge avoidance of a massive amount of negative emotion that if we processed, there would be no repetition compulsion, I claim. I claim that if you follow this process, it will, and you actually develop this skill, it would be very hard for you to get caught in another narcissistically abusive relationship. Because you are now acknowledging your needs, you're acknowledging your emotions, you're acknowledging your intuition. Not in this strange, sweaty, guilty, half in, half out way that we do before we learn this technique.
Compassion, yeah.
Exactly. You need massive amounts of self-compassion to get this work done. It was a good question. Thank you. Did I answer it?
You did, and just there was a little bit left I didn't.
Go on, get it out.
And you triggered it now, so I'll just ask it. What about if you're a person that sort of overreacts in a situation and you get, you know, emotional for, you know, unproportional reaction, basically?
Okay.
So if you're kind of thinking about that, you know, oh, today this happened and I reacted like this, for example, then like thinking about that reaction, could you reinforce it?
The overreaction to situations that don't require that level of emotion, it will frequently come down to an inability to process emotion. So you're stuck inside of certain emotions, as we said before, where you're feeling angry. You're never fully acknowledging the anger. It's never fully in nor fully out. So it's kind of halfway there. It's kind of half suppressed. It gets changed. It becomes transmuted. You experience it in a strange way, in a half denial way, and then it leaks. That's the overreaction, is emotion that is not being processed properly, that is just leaking out and finding an opportunity to spring out where it's not really merited. When you're doing this process, if you had overreacted something in a way that was excessively angry, you would, as you're journaling this, I would ask you to be writing down adjectives specifically that describe emotion. Most of us only define our emotions in terms of 3 or 4 things. Happy, sad, depressed, angry, for example. Numb, you know, whatever. It tends to become this very, very two-dimensional, non-nuanced way of processing emotion. I feel good, I feel bad. It's very, very sort of Neanderthal way of doing it. The more nuanced the expression of your emotion is, the more emotional literacy you have, the more understanding you can have for how you feel, and the easier it becomes to make connections with other people. My emotional literacy has made it hugely easier for me to actually form bonds with people that are boundaried. It's very hard to form boundaried, full bonds with people when you're emotionally illiterate, because you never really know where the lines are. Who's going to show you? You were not taught that by your parents. You've got to teach yourself. If you're not emotionally literate, it's very, very hard. So.
Is that why you can cry a lot, like in films and stuff, when you get emotionally?
It can be if somebody hasn't grieved properly, in the same way that if somebody hasn't expressed their anger properly, there's a wellspring of anger there that's going to come out over nothing. If there's a wellspring of sadness there, that you can't, you know, you can talk about a dreadful thing that happened and not cry, and then you see like a Disney movie and all of a sudden you're in floods of tears and it's an inappropriate response to the film. It's emotion phobia. You've become emotion phobic because as a child you learn not to feel those feelings because it felt like those feelings were going to destroy you because they were so chaos inducing, and so it was just too much adrenaline. So you learn, push it to one side. That worked. as a child. It was a functional response, a functional psychological defense mechanism, but it makes for twitchy adults who have unwanted effects on the people around them, who struggle to maintain normal relationships, even to build them in the first place. We struggle to connect. And the impression that we give people very often isn't the one that we would want. I came across this through just trying to be objective about myself and being like, well, what would you think if you met you? And I was like, oh shit, I'm weird. And I was like, this is not what I want to communicate. And I was like, well, what do you think you communicate? If you say this, if you do that, if you know, these things, it can only communicate one thing. So it then allows us to take responsibility for, you know, how we connect with others. I want you specifically to drill down into every emotion. So if you identify an emotion, I feel sad about something that happened today, you would write the word sad and then drill down into the emotion and draw more emotion from it. You're sad, but what else are you? I don't know. What is it? Disappointed. Why are you disappointed? Well, you know, they said they would do that and they didn't, blah, blah, blah. You know, break it down, break it down, break it down, and keep looking at how these things make you feel. Use adjectives that describe emotion, and particularly pay attention to what the emotions are trying to communicate to you. When you have a feeling, it's not nothing. Don't go to your doctor and say, I feel anxious, take it away with pills. Go and ask, why do I feel anxious? What is the body system, you know, this extremely complicated evolutionary tool that we're operating, what's it trying to tell me? It's not going to be nothing. The feeling of anxiety is a desire to run. Well, what are we running from? Well, there must be a danger somewhere in the environment. Why don't we explore that before trying to numb out with drugs or whatever it is? Look at what they're trying to communicate to you. Honor the emotion. Honor the emotion. There are these color wheels online of emotion for those of us who aren't particularly emotionally literate. They can be useful, very, very useful. So as you're doing the exercise, you can look some of these up and go, okay, what is it that I'm feeling right now? I'm feeling annoyance. Well, what are the potential feelings around annoyance? Well, I don't feel contempt. I don't feel aggressive. I do feel a bit of rage and self-loathing. Yes, okay. You can drill down using these tools that are freely available to you. Anything that allows you to expand, to explode out these feelings. Because right now, for most of the people looking around the room, you can see in people's body language, it's this. Get down, get into the... Shh, shh. I'm fine. It's a twitchy style. And even in communication, you don't realize it, but I can see there's pain there. Like, people are like, oh, are you enjoying the seminar? And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. Huge pain flickers across the eyes. Sometimes, of course, in order to function in the world, we must suppress emotion. You can't just be leaking emotion everywhere all the time. But there has to be a context in which you can safely acknowledge how you feel, or you will suffer. It won't be nice. You're not going to lead a very pleasant internal subjective life. And it makes CPTSD a lot worse, of course. The more stressed out you are over unexpressed emotions, the more you're going to fall back to these trauma responses, which have worked for us in the past. The angrier I'm going to become, the more I will run, the more I will dissociate, because I'm not feeling my feelings, because they're terrifying. You all look like you're writing stuff and then staring at the screen. Can I take it off, please? I'll send you this stuff. I'll send it to you afterwards. I did this in PowerPoint. As you can see, I'm not very good with PowerPoint. I did a spider diagram. I was so proud. I just wrote down the word anger, and I was trying to, relay visually what I want you to be doing. Do this with a pen, colored pens. It's fun, gets you into a childlike state, accesses the right brain. You get to sit there, dissociate pleasantly, but whilst you're dissociating pleasantly, you can get some real work done. Write down how you feel and spider diagram it. And you can not just write down emotions, you can also write down causes of emotions, if that helps you. And then when you've done that and you look at it, you go, holy shit, now I see why I started crying when that person took my parking space. I'm not crazy. Because that shit has happened, right? Just me? Just me. Why did you do it? I did cry in traffic once in Kuala Lumpur. I did cry. I saw a therapist afterwards. He was like, bro, la, what's wrong with you, la? Huh? Why you cry, huh? I was like, I don't know what it is. And then we drilled down, and it was like this symbolic of how people don't see each other, how they don't care, how they don't interact with compassion. They just ride roughshod over each other.
But if you're feeling sensitive, don't drive in Kuala Lumpur. Get a taxi. This is another way it's been done. This is not just a description. I found this on Google Images. I thought it was pretty cool. It's not just a description of emotions. It's also thoughts that go with the emotion. But don't get lost in the thoughts. Emotion is primary here. How do you feel? What is that emotion telling you? Anger is going to be a self-protective response. The sadness is going to be something that we haven't processed yet in terms of grief. The anxiety is going to be the running away. And the freezing is you're scared. Something feels threatening in the environment. But it could be an exam. It could be a bank statement. It could be something that's completely symbolic. I don't know. The only way we're going to drill down to that is through doing this. By the way, there ain't that much more to therapy than this. This is primarily what counseling and therapy tries to do. It tries to get into your internal world. It tries to access your unconscious. The fastest way to access your internal world and your unconscious, emotion. Go there first. That's why I usually can do work with people that's quite rapid. So I go, give me the emotion, give me the emotion, give me the emotion. Secondary to that is the pattern. What is the pattern that's in place here that's holding those emotions down for us? Why? You need to improve your emotional literacy. If the muscle is strong and flexed and greased and ready to go, ooh, I wish I hadn't said greased. Then I'm stuck now. I'm stuck. Let me look over here. Pattern interrupt. If the neural pathways are strong and flowing well, then this just becomes easier. The emotions that would give you an emotional flashback that could last all day or all week, now you can actually process, identify, and go, that's what I'm feeling, and let it go. We tend to talk about emotional flashbacks as though they're singularities along a timeline in people's lives. For many people who are deep in their CPTSD, they're just moving from one shitstorm to the next. They sleep in flashback. They wake up in flashback. Then the flashback's not as bad, and then it's worse. And so they're flashbacking the whole time. This has an extremely damaging effect on your capacity to process reality and your own thoughts effectively. Layla, do you still have the mic? Could you sing us a song? That lady's looking to ask a question. Thank you. Could you start your question with, question?
Like Beyonce?
Like Beyonce, yeah. Question?
Question?
Thanks.
Oh, hang on. I forgot what the question was.
Wow. It's just babble.
Emotional flashbacks. I still don't totally get it. So when someone sparks that, it's just like a memory of your emotion from when you had a bad experience with a narcissist or something.
Ah, you don't know. Okay. An emotional flashback. Emotional flashback is the sort of foundation stone of complex PTSD. So you've seen films about war veterans who have flashbacks and they have standard PTSD. Judith Herman in the early 90s came up with a concept called complex PTSD rooted in emotional flashbacks, studying people who had been political prisoners and prisoners of war, where they weren't necessarily beaten, they weren't necessarily physically damaged the way somebody with PTSD typically would. They were emotionally damaged. So, to give it you really rapidly, PTSD, singular event. I get punched in the face by a guy in a red t-shirt, and I know what the source of the pain is, and it makes me feel a certain way, and the trigger is guys in red t-shirts. CPTSD is when that guy in a red t-shirt imprisons me and says things and does things to me that are guilt-inducing and humiliating and shameful, and I don't actually have a physical pain, I have an emotional pain, and I can't see the trigger. The trigger is invisible. You'll learn what your emotional flashback triggers are, but it takes time. And they're usually something that is context-specific. So when somebody speaks to you in a certain way, or this situation reminds you of a situation from childhood, then you're going to get an emotional flashback, which is just the feeling of the childhood event, usually. PTSD, with the normal flashback, is I see a guy in a red t-shirt, suddenly I have the feeling of being punched in the face. And it's, I know what it is, it was a singular event. Now, obviously, all of these things are just completely made up because PTSD is CPTSD. There's no such thing as a person with CPTSD who doesn't have PTSD. And now they are admitting it in the research that vets who come back with PTSD frequently have CPTSD, and if they won't admit CPTSD, they will admit borderline personality disorder. This answer is getting complicated. I can see you phasing out. Yeah, did that give you an idea of what
Yeah.
I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So it's a flashback that is purely emotional. So for some reason or barely any reason at all, you're enraged. You're absolutely, there's just no real reason for it, but you're just enraged. But if you actually look back at the way somebody spoke to you via text or the last thing that happened before you left the house, it will remind you of another situation, and a lot of times it's unconscious. CPTSD can then be a little bit worse because we feel like we're the problem. At least with PTSD, you can say it's that one time that that guy punched me in the face, or I was, the vehicle I was in was struck by an IED. It happened, and that was the event that caused the trauma. For the rest of us, it's like, maybe I'm just the fuck up that people tell me I am, because it's internal, it's boundaryless, you don't know, how to fix it. Yes, sir?
I just want to, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to, on a personal note,
I think the battery might be dying, I don't know.
okay, with me, I've got no memories as such of childhood, just feelings and emotions. So when I've had mine, it wasn't from memory, it was just from feelings and emotion.
Yeah. That can happen with extreme trauma in childhood. The visual, auditory, and kinesthetic memories are completely cut off, but the emotional memories still leak through. The memories will be there somewhere, but yeah, as a survival mechanism, a part of your brain has gone, yeah, I'm not going to look at that. It's best if we don't do that, and it's gotten good at that over the years. You probably can still do that in adulthood. If there's things you don't want to think about, you probably just shove them in the same box. You're smiling. It's like, that's where they go. Okay. What? You have a comment? You're not allowed. You're the black sheep. You don't get any. Can you please? Thanks for the warning. Everyone get comfy. Here we go.
I read about something called schema therapy. Is that what you're talking about now?
Yeah, schema therapy, it vectors in for this kind of thing. There's a lot of therapeutic modalities that look at this. Schema therapy, as far as I'm aware, has had some good results with PTSD in particular. There are lots of, they tend to overlap. They tend to do things in a very similar way. One of the things that I've noticed is the therapeutic modalities that work tend to help the individual to re-establish a new narrative about themselves, and very frequently they do something physical, because a lot of the problem is in the body, and actually physically engaging the client seems to, many times, it seems to help. It seems to be a factor that can help with that. One more question over there, and then we need to crack on. Yes?
Can I just ask you about hypnotherapy? Sorry. Can I ask you about hypnotherapy?
Yes.
I'm studying hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
And how that would help with the
Okay.
subconscious.
Okay. I will answer that question. Because you just pass the mic to the lady behind you. I'm going to stick both of the answers together. Yes. You had your... Oh,
yeah,
okay.
sorry.
That's all right. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
No, it was you?
Yeah.
I saw her hand as your hand.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not your
Time
fault.
to go on.
That's my fault. You don't be sorry because I see things wrong. That's not allowed anymore. It's my mistake.
Okay.
Go on.
When I was talking to you, and when I'm talking about it and I'm actually thinking, associating what I'm saying with actual events, and I was shaking and stuttering, is that CPTSD?
It could be PTSD. It's don't try and make too much of a distinction between these things. It's
Or a flashback, I mean.
It was a flashback. You were in a flashback, but of course it's ludicrous. I'm not saying you're ludicrous. I'm saying the way they try and describe in the literature is to say, okay, a soldier gets shot. Of course he has a feeling about that. Of course he has, it's not just, oh, he got shot and this happened, da-da-da. There is a feeling that goes with that. The other thing that they weren't looking at, but they're starting to, is that soldier was on patrol for weeks, fearing being shot. So nothing happened, but he was in that context. So when you were shaking, as you were describing it to me before, it's a trauma response. It's PTSD and it's CPTSD. The PTSD is you can get flashing images running through your head of everything that happened, who said what to who, particularly high drama incidents, the amazing capacity your brain has to play horrible horror movies in your head to keep you scared. And you're feeling a confusing mix of emotions that are completely out of control. And the body in that moment shakes because you're ready to run away or bash my head in with a rock. Because you don't, you're like, something's wrong, something's wrong. It's not, don't hate it. It's a protective mechanism. The body is trying to help. Like I say, we're fighting evolution. We've got to kind of work with evolution in order to make this stuff work. If I could borrow the mic again, if you guys could have that forward. Thank you. The hypnotherapy question.
So when we talk about emotional, visual flashbacks, we usually refer to, or I get in my head, are terrible images, something that caused you trauma. However, can visuals be, for example, something that your narcissist said, or yes, that's something sweet that he said, and he didn't act it in that manner, and so you're constantly, like, for example, I lived my life thinking about the past, hoping for a better future, right? Never the present, and just constantly reliving these scenarios of promises and future together and all that.
The short answer to your question is yes. The things that were said and the things that were done, they would also count. The last time I looked into the research for this, I was stuck in a 3-hour-long rabbit hole that ended up with researchers arguing on what memory is. And actually, they wanted to redefine memory. And some people were saying, well, you can't use this treatment modality because it doesn't affect memory. And the other ones were going, of course it does. This is what memory is. And then you have a semantic argument. But yes, the mechanisms are still the same. But if you go far along enough down that line, you are going to have to start looking at what is a memory and what are real memories and non-real memories and things like that. So the simple answer, let's just stick with yes.
Yes. Well, the point is, because whenever I think about that year, that was the love bombing, stage, that's all you remember. And then you go into crying mode, into trying to, and you can't see how the real person or the person that he is, or you cannot put him together with that person that he was or pretended to be, and so that constantly is throwing you into emotional flashback.
This is a very common response to in victims in being in an emotionally abusive relationship. So if that person is manifesting 2 different personalities, kind of, take that with a pinch of salt, I don't literally mean multiple personality disorder, but in 2 different formats with 2 separate messages, your brain has to receive them as 2 separate messages, and then it has to say, who was talking? There's one person, but there's 2 people there, and that creates a huge amount of stress, can create a huge amount of stress. I'm going to finish by answering the hypnotherapy question. Hypnotherapy, in this context, could be the key that unlocks the door for all the healing, or it could be an absolute nightmare. The reason why it can be a nightmare, it depends on how it's applied. My understanding of and definition of hypnotherapy is broad. This is hypnosis. I litter all of my talks with post-hypnotic suggestions because it works. If I tell a joke and then people laugh, right after that, the words, and then you can relax and feel better, will sneak up in the sentences that come after that. This is a hypnotic state that everybody's in as they're listening. So that's fine. And yes, you have to do hypnosis with your clients. It's how you do it. Having them lie down and imagine certain things in certain scenarios. If that person has PTSD or if they have borderline personality disorder, you could have a full-blown psychotic episode on your hands. And so they generally recommend for PTSD and borderline and CPTSD, which unfortunately can vector in together, don't do classical hypnotherapy. But covert hypnosis and just chatting, that works really well. You seem to be just, so if you can, for this, if you want to work in this field, study Ericksonian hypnosis, covert hypnosis, guiding people through different emotional states, making them feel safe accessing their emotional states. Hypnosis is a fantastic tool. Lying somebody down and going, now imagine walking down a staircase, it can be really bad because that's the moment at which the flashbacks can leak in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can narcissistic people be hypnotherapy? Does it work on them or hypnotized?
I wouldn't have too much hope for that.
No.
I'm not sure what was happening there, and I wouldn't want to say, but I wouldn't hold too much hope for hypnosis as a solution for narcissistic personality disorder. For the entire time that you are entranced in hypnosis, you're fully aware of what's going on, and if you refuse an injunction or a suggestion, and the narcissist will, if you're suggesting something they don't want to do, they may never really relinquish control to you, they may just pretend to. It can be a bit of a hot mess. Guys, let's go grab a coffee and then try and come back here inside of 15 minutes, please. Thank you very much.